Hey everyone! So in this video I'm going to talk about the scientific literature and some tips and tricks for how to go about finding primary research articles on any topic of interest. And the goal here is to help you get started with tracking down research articles related to your project topic so that by the time you're ready to start writing about your project, you already have a body of information to draw from and relate to your findings. So first off, what are primary research articles exactly? So by now, you've hopefully encountered some in a few of your previous courses, but we're going to just reiterate what they are here so that hopefully that's very clear to you. So primary research articles are how scientists communicate with each other. They generally contain very technical language, so it can take some work to decipher them if you're new to a specific research field. And they're also peer-reviewed. So I want to take a minute to talk about what peer review means. And to give you an idea, I'm going to talk about what happens whenever I've conducted a set of experiments. So when I conduct experiments, I come up with some questions and hypotheses. I develop models. I use that to design experiments and collect data. And then I analyze my results and use that whole works to write up a paper about my findings. And once I've done all of that, and the writing step, I'll note, usually involves writing and then rewriting again, and then writing one more time and really polishing my work to the extent that I can. So once I've done that, and I think what I have is ready, I will pick a scientific journal to send my paper to. So to name one example, I've sent a couple of papers to a journal called Functional Ecology. So here's an example of one of those papers. And once the journal gets my article manuscript, an editor at that journal will take a look at it. And if it looks like the topic is something that will be of interest to readers of that journal, the editor will then look for a couple of other scientists who are specialists for that topic that the article is about. So other biologists who study nutrient regulation in insects in this particular case. That editor will then send my paper out to those specialists, and the specialists will read through the paper very carefully, and they will provide an extremely thorough critique of it. They'll then send those critiques back to the editor, who will take a look at them and then make a decision. So, for example, is this paper a stupendous and eloquent and groundbreaking piece of work that's going to change how we do science forever? If so, the editor may decide to accept the paper on the spot. But that's actually extremely rare. What happens much more often is that the reviewers will uncover aspects of the paper that could stand to be improved. Maybe there's a different way to analyze the data. Maybe there's some other research that ties in well that should be discussed. Maybe the experiments aren't entirely satisfactory. So if that's the case, the editor is going to make some more decisions. In some cases, maybe the flaws are minor. So the editor might say, okay, we'll accept this paper for publication, but only after you make these few small changes. Or the editor may send the paper back and say that they'll reconsider after some of the major issues are addressed. Or after everything's said and done, sometimes the editor will conclude that maybe this paper is not a great fit for this journal after all. So, there'll be a wash, rinse, repeat cycle for resubmitting an article at that point. And so, in any case, across all of this, the peer review process is not a perfect process, but my point here is that it's an important quality control step on the way to publication. So is the science presented in this paper sound and trustworthy? So if a paper passes peer review, then generally the answer is yes. So that's a peer review process, but what you need to be able to do now is you need to be able to spot primary research articles in the wild. So one other giveaway that what you're looking at is a primary research article is that they always follow a very structured organizational system. So to use my paper here as an example, if you are indeed looking at a research article, you'll discover a couple of things. So it's got a title. Here it's got an abstract. In this case, it's labeled as a summary. Below that, it's got an introduction. After that, it's got materials and methods. From there, we see a results section. And then after that, there is a discussion. And then there's also a references section at the end. And so here, I think there might be somewhere around maybe 40 or 50 references for this one primary research article. Okay, so what really makes an article a primary research article is the presence of two key sections, the methods and the results sections, because those sections indicate that this paper is detailing specifics for a certain set of experiments. And one of the reasons I'm elaborating on the characteristics of primary research articles here is because there are a lot of other types of scientific articles that exist in the wild. And when you're looking for primary research articles, you need to learn to recognize what you're looking at and how to distinguish primary research articles from these other secondary and tertiary article types. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of these other types. One such example is a review. So a review is typically a long article that summarizes a whole bunch of primary research. So the article I'm showing you here is one that's 33 pages long. It also has a lot of references. Go down to the reference section here. This reference section goes on for 7 or 8 pages, so tons of references. And it also has subsections, right? So here's a subsection about birds. There might be an introduction up here somewhere. So background information. So it's got subsections. But if we look through this entire paper, you'll discover that it does not have methods or results sections. But one really great thing about reviews, such as this one, are that they can be real gold mines for good ideas. And they can also be a gold mine for tracking down primary research articles, because review articles typically cite a whole bunch of primary research articles. So there are also a type of research article that are called a meta-analysis. And here's one that conveniently enough says that word in the title. It says research article, but it also says meta-analysis here. So a paper like this one takes a whole bunch of primary research articles and then conducts a new overarching analysis of a common question studied across those primary research articles. So here's an example of doing that for lost ecosystem attributes in urban streams and use of and effectiveness of some kind of out-of-channel management practice. So what my guess would be is that this article has taken a bunch of research papers studying individual urban streams, and it has combined results from those papers. So you notice it still has sections like methods, and here's a giant table. So there's some results here as well. But if you scrutinize the methods in this paper, it's going to say, we went and picked out a whole bunch of papers and read through those papers, and that's where we got our data for this project. So that's called a meta-analysis. So another thing that you might find is that some academic journals also often publish shorter commentary pieces that go along with the publication of a primary research article. So to give you an example of that, here is a primary research article about genomic regions in honeybees and how that relates to aggressive behavior in those honeybees. So again, you'll see we've got, in this case, the sections are organized in a slightly different order. So we've got results here, but if we keep going, at the end of this article, here's our giveaway, the materials and methods for this project. Okay, so here's the primary research article, but then also here is another paper labeled as a commentary, and you'll notice it has some subsections, but it doesn't have methods and results. So this commentary article is actually about the primary research article that I just showed you, but it's a lot shorter. And often, if you find a commentary article, it can be a really good way to get a sense of what the actual primary research article is about and why it's important. And sometimes these come from a reviewer that's written about the primary research article if that reviewer had something that was really insightful to say about the research. So for the sake of citing primary research articles, Commentaries can be useful, but you need to hunt down and read the actual primary research article. So now, beyond these article types, you've probably encountered a number of examples of popular science articles. So, those are things that get written up in newspapers, or you can think of a website like Wikipedia serving a similar function, or there's a website called Science Daily. And on this website, we've got a whole bunch of headlines here. These are news articles. These are not primary research articles. They do actually cite the primary research, but they themselves are not primary research articles. And so, these again are typically written for a broader audience, and so they're going to use less technical language. But a trade-off is they're usually pretty sketchy on the details. So again, they might be a good starting point, but you need to keep digging deeper to find the original research. And then the last category of other things to look out for are textbooks. So for our purposes, it's important to realize that textbooks tend to report only findings that are broadly agreed upon by scientists. So while they can often be a useful starting point for learning about a subject, they may not reflect up-to-date understanding of that subject, and they may also be kind of sketchy on the details. Now, there are a lot of textbooks that do actually contain references to the primary research literature, and so they do have their uses, and I'll point that out, in a second here. So, here's an example of the textbook that we use for animal physiology, and at the end of every chapter, there is actually a reference section. So some of the references here might wind up being useful, and then this whole textbook also has a section in the back with even more primary research articles. So what's written in this textbook comes from primary research articles, but that's not the end of the story. Okay, so that's enough about how to spot primary research articles in the wild, but the next question is, how can you find primary research articles that are related to your specific topic? And this is where academic search engines come into play. And so now we're going to shift over to looking at some of our options through our scientific writing library guide. So there's a link to this guide on Canvas, and it's going to take you to this splash page here. That's also going to give you a quick review of major types of resources that you might encounter and a summary of those things. So when you are here, and you're ready to start looking for resources, you can click this Finding the Resources tab, and this is going to bring you to a collection of databases that you can use. And it's a little overwhelming to look at this collection, so we're going to focus our efforts for right now on using Google Scholar as our starting point. So I'm just going to click that link. And let's say that now I'm interested in continuing my studies of cricket nutrition. So I want to see, what's been written about cricket nutrition. So just like with a regular search bar, I can just put in a subject here. And it's going to pull up a set of articles about cricket nutrition. And, what I might discover here is on my initial search, this isn't particularly useful for what I'm interested in. Supplementation of grass by no nutrients, artificial diets for house crickets. So given that, I might need to be a little bit more specific in my search. And so here, helpfully, Google's actually come up with some potential related searches that I might be interested in. And in actuality, my main interest is on cricket nutrition and metabolism. So I'm going to add to my search with metabolism. And now I'm getting some different articles. And when you're trying to really hone in on articles on a specific topic, what you want to do is take a look at the titles of the articles that you're encountering. And that's kind of your first pass for kind of quality control for, is this article going to be one that's going to work for me? So here on this page of results, I've got a set of different journal article titles, so I can start to read through these and see if any of them sound like they might be ones that will be relevant for my interests. So this uppermost one has a thrilling title of Comparison of a Cricket Diet with Peanut-Based and Milk-Based Diets in the Recovery from Protein Malnutrition in Mice and the Impact on Growth, Metabolism, and ... So it looks like this is actually more about mice than it is about cricket nutrition, so it doesn't sound like it's quite so interesting to me. So I'm going to skip it. This second article here says intermediary metabolism and life history trade-offs, lipid metabolism in lines of the wing polymorphic cricket Gryllus firmus selected for flight capability versus early ... Okay, this is actually closer to something that I would be looking for. And it's actually sort of funny as well, because I happen to know the author of this article very well, because this is one of my collaborators. And my collaborator's been studying these crickets for almost 30 years by this point, so he really is an expert on metabolism in these crickets. So if I reach this point, and now this article sounds like something that might fit really well with what I'm looking for, then what I can do is click on the title, and it's going to bring me to a new page. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to open it in a new tab, and so that we can come back to this Google search page. And that's something you may wind up wanting to do depending on how you organize your search. But now if I come to this other page here, so what this has done is this has taken me to the page for the specific journal that this article has been published in. So, traditionally, these journals were hard copy journals, so like a magazine. So you could, get a subscription to this journal and then get it in your mailbox, once a month or once every 3 months or whatever. Now a lot of that activity's moved online, but each journal is still published by a specific publisher, and so each journal will have its own homepage. And Siena has subscriptions to many academic journals, but we don't have subscriptions to all of them. So there's going to be a little bit of sifting to see whether or not we have the specific article that you're interested in. And when you're doing this, if you run into roadblocks and you found an article that looks like it's just going to be absolutely perfect, that's where interlibrary loan is going to come into play. But for right now, with this particular article, so this search has taken me to this journal homepage, and what it's showing me is an HTML version of this article. So here's my abstract, introduction, some background. Oh, and at this point, what do you think? Is this looking like it's a primary research article, or is it looking like something else? I'm going to say I think it looks like a review. Actually, I know it's a review. So this one would not qualify for the purpose of finding a primary research article. So this is an HTML version of the article. Usually in the long term for readability and for keeping articles, it's most useful to work with a PDF version. So every journal's organized a little bit differently, but in this case, thankfully, this PDF button is pretty obvious here, so I can just click on that. Moment of silence, and it will pull up the version that's been formatted for hard copy publication. So at this point, I can download this and save it somewhere. I like to give things a name that's the first author's last name and then the year, so Zira 2005, and then a couple of keywords that remind me what this article is about. So, this might be Zira 2005, metabolism, life history, trade-offs, crickets, something like that. So, then I've got my article and I'm ready to start reading it. So, that's one example. So as I've been alluding to, since this is a review, this article itself won't work. But what about this? What if I'm reading this review and it's talking about findings from another paper, and those findings in some other paper that's cited, let's say something that's cited in this paper down here, that sounds like something that could fit really well with the point that I'm trying to make. So here, for example, we've got someone named Jodin et al., 1996, so a citation within this text. So one other thing I can do is now I can go to the reference section and find a citation for this article, Jodin et al., 1996. And maybe that will be a primary research article that could work for this assignment. Okay, so here's Jodin, and et al. Stands for and others, so it means multiple other authors. So in this case, here is Jodin et al. 1996, and it's an article about metabolic aspects of the trade-off between fecundity and longevity in Drosophila melanogaster. So that's actually about fruit flies. Okay, so it's not about crickets. That's a little disappointing, but we've got to think outside of our study organism. So maybe this paper on fruit flies will be something that will be useful. So if I want to find this specific paper, what I can do is I'm going to open up another instance of Google Scholar. And I'm going to put in the author's last name. So this is 1996. And I'm going to pull a couple of words from this title. So the 1996 is metabolic aspects of the trade-off in Drosophila. So metabolic, and Google Scholar very helpfully is auto-completing to say metabolic aspects. So it's guessing what I want, and it's not the top hit, but it's actually the second hit here in this Google Scholar search. So now, if I click on that, it's going to take me through the same sort of process. Let's just check and see. So we've got an abstract, but it looks like we don't have the full article here. Let's see what happens if we view PDF. And in this case, it's sending me to a list of price tags. I can buy this article if I'd like for nothing more than $193 for a hard copy of this book. So in a case like this, don't spend any money on tracking down primary research articles. It may mean that I'm going to need to request this through interlibrary loan. If I go back now to the Google Scholar page, sometimes it's possible to find it through other means. And so here, for example, on the right-hand side, I've got another link that says pdfsemanticscholar.org. So let's try that and see what happens. Aha! So this actually brought me to a hard copy of this article using different means. So it's worth it to poke around and see if there's another way to get what you're after in many cases. And that set of links on the right side is part of our attempts to make it easier to get to primary research articles when they're available through various different channels. So we'll take a look here. There's an abstract, introduction, materials and methods. So bingo, I've got a primary research article here. Now, is this article useful or any good for my purposes? I'm going to have to start reading it to figure that out. So what you want to do after you've looked at titles and determined, okay, this sounds like it could work for what I'm interested in, the next step is going to be to start reading through the abstract. So, this abstract is one that's just going to roll right off the tongues. It's about antagonistic pleiotropes between fecundity and longevity in Drosophila melanogaster. So what I'm going to do now is I'll read through this abstract. So pleiotropy might be due to a trade-off. We tested this in Drosophila. Here's what we did. Here's what we found. Here's our conclusions. And I might say, okay, yeah, this actually does sound like it's going to be related to my topic, so I'll put this in my stack. Check, I've got one article down. We're not done there, of course. We have to keep going. So, so this whole process of looking through one article, in this case we started out with this review, and finding a reference that is in that review article, so this Jodin et al., primary research article. So this process is known as a reverse search, right? Anything that's cited in a newer article is by nature going to be older than that article. And so we're kind of looking back in time at some of the intellectual history behind the findings that are reported in this more recent article. And this one's not even all that recent. Let's see, I think it was 2005 or so. Yeah, 2005. So, you know, it's only 15 years old at this point. So at the same time, I might be interested in knowing what's the cutting edge for this research area. And for accomplishing that, we can do the inverse of a reverse search. We can forward search. And here's another thing where using Google Scholar comes in really handy. So you'll notice here's the review article that we had been looking at right here. And underneath it, there's a link that says cited by 74. So if I click this link, this is going to bring me to a set of newer articles that have all cited the review article that I had just been looking at. So these are going to be more recent research. And they also tell me that this particular article is one that people were interested in, so they cited it, and they're kind of continuing that whole thread of research. So sometimes this will help you find more recent primary research that will work well for your purposes. In other cases, I can actually tell you that this topmost article here is yet another review article. So I might, again, in this case, this other review article actually got cited 585 times. So this might actually bring me to another area of the literature that might be of interest. And this has pulled up things like a book and a bunch of other things. So it may take a bit of work to sort and sift through some of these articles to find articles that will work well for to answer your questions. And so you do have to be a little strategic about how you approach this so that you're not spending hours and hours going down rabbit holes. But it is very, very helpful to spend some time looking through things here on Google Scholar to find articles that will be a good match for your purposes. I could talk more about this, but more than anything, it's good to get practice tracking down your own articles. So I'm going to wrap this video up here, and if and when you discover you have questions about searching for articles, get in touch with myself or Dr. Burke. And also realize that the librarians are also here to help you with this, so they can be another resource for tracking down good articles. And keep in mind that librarians are trained in information science, so it's their job to figure out how to get to relevant information quickly and efficiently. And they tend to be more than happy to help you work through that process as well. So you've got a bunch of resources to now go out and start finding primary research articles that are related to your research project.